So as I said before, I'm Giacomo Marino. I'm a bioinformatics software engineer in the lab, and I'll be co-presenting with Sherry Shi today. And we'll be starting out talking about UNIX shell commands and Python. So just a brief outline of the lecture. We'll go over using the terminal and then talk about some basic Python concepts and an intro to Python. So just a preface before we get into this portion of the lecture. This tutorial was designed with Unix-based operating systems. So that would be Mac OS or Linux. You can follow this tutorial on Windows, and we would recommend installing Windows subsystem for Linux. The native commands in Windows are different and differ also by Windows version. So just to make everything standardized, Windows subsystem for Linux, or WSL, is a good option if you want to follow along on Windows. So just first to give an overview of the file system. I'm sure many of you are quite familiar with this, but we like to think of this as a sort of tree. So we have perhaps your account folder or your home directory, and then you'll have directories inside of that, and then perhaps files and more directories. So your file system is branching out. So I'll refer to sort of moving up a level in our file system, and that would be going from, for instance, photos into your documents, or changing directories down into your photos. So we're kind of traversing the tree both up and down of our file system. So you're probably used to doing this through our user interface file explorers, such as Finder on Mac or File Explorer on Windows. But we'll be using terminal today. And there's a few benefits to terminal. One, it will be faster once you are familiar with the commands and feel comfortable with them. And the second is that it will provide you some additional functionality that you can't access through the user interface, such as Finder. So on Mac, if you haven't opened terminal before, you can search for it, which is easy to do with the command space, and you can just type it in, and you should see a window that looks something like this. So as we kind of walk through the commands today, I encourage you to kind of have terminal open and just be playing around with it and trying to follow along, especially if you haven't used terminal before. So we're going to go over just the basic commands today. There are many more than this, but this is a good place to start, and we'll give you a lot of that basic functionality that will allow you to kind of perform everything you need to for the time being in terminal. So just to go through them briefly, and then we'll go through them in more detail one by one. But PWD is going to display or print your working directory, so where you are currently in the file system. LS is going to list the directory content. CD will change your directory. MV is going to allow you to move a file or rename a file. Touch can let you change the timestamp of a file or create a new file if that file doesn't exist. We have cat, which can view file contents. mkdir is going to make a new directory. rm is going to remove a file. rmdir is going to remove a directory. Find can be used to find files and directories. Man will display documentation on commands, and grep is used to find text strings in files. So again, not a comprehensive list, but a good place to start. You'll also notice when you're in your terminal that you can't click on the line to move your cursor. And so there's actually a series of keyboard shortcuts that can be very helpful and make navigating the terminal much faster. So I'll go through them now. Don't feel like you need to memorize them, but I would particularly pay attention to the first four that might come in handy and speed up the process when you're using the terminal. So Control-C, for instance, if you have a process, so perhaps you run a command or you're running a code file, and for some reason it will never finish completion, or it's taking a very long time, longer than you expected. Control-C is a way to terminate that process. So this is a very useful and important command to know. Additionally, tab in the bash window will allow you to auto-complete a command or file name. So this can save you a lot of time when you're trying to manually type out file paths if you're trying to navigate to a certain directory or run a certain file. And then up arrow and down arrow are going to let you scroll through your previous commands in terminal. And again, this will come in very handy. You'll find yourself running the same command many times often. So you want to be able to go retrieve those. And then the rest mostly have to do with navigating or moving your cursor in terminal, such as moving to the beginning of the line with Control A, the end of the line with Control E, deleting characters before the cursor, Control K, deleting deletes the word before the cursor with Control W. You can paste the last deleted text with Control Y. Control L clears the terminal screen, and Control R will search for a command that starts with the characters that you've already typed. So again, I know that's a lot of shortcuts to keep in mind, but I would say particularly pay attention to these first four and just try to at least be aware that those exist. Okay, so now to go through these commands in a little bit more depth. So this is an example of using our print working directory, or PWD. And as you can see, it will just print that path, which on Mac is just the base user directory, in this case called Michael. ls is going to display the contents of your current directory. So we're still in that home directory. And if we do ls, we'll see a lot of the folders that we're probably used to interacting with, such as applications, downloads, desktop, etc. One thing to also be aware of is that many of these commands have additional flags that will change the functionality of the command or provide additional information. So this is not just for the ls command, this is for all the commands that we'll talk about. But some examples of flags that you could use with the ls command are -a. -a is going to show you hidden files. So these are files that start with a period. We don't need to talk too much about them at this point, but it's just good to know they exist. And you can see these with the -a flag. Another useful command with ls is the -l flag, and this will show you the long formatting. That includes permissions, the owner, the type of file, the ID, and the size. So this will give you, sort of a more comprehensive view of what files you're actually looking at in that directory. So the cd command will let you change directory, and it can be used in sort of three different ways. So the first is just with no argument, just cd. And this is going to move you all the way back to your home directory. So in this case, that was that first path that we looked at, users/your username. So you can see that here. And we're starting in the documents folder if you can see here in the command line. You can also specify the path that you want to move to after the cd command. So here we would change directory to the downloads. And then we can see that in our command line, that path is now reflected. And then cd ... if we think back to our file system diagram, ... is going to move us one level up in our file system. So for instance, if we are in our downloads, which is inside of our users directory, and we do cd ... that's just going to take us one level up into that users directory. So just for navigating the file system very in a basic way, cd is going to be sort of one of your best friends, and ls as well. So the mv command is going to let you move files to a different location. So we have mv, source destination. So here we're renaming a file called file.txt. We are moving a file called file.txt into this folder called new location. And if we change directory into our new location and list its contents with ls, then we can see that that file is now there. And then this same command can be used to rename files in the current directory as well. So here we have that same file, file.txt, and we'll just name it this new name.txt. And then we can see that reflected if we list the contents with ls. The touch command will let you create a new file, or it will change the timestamp of the file if it already exists. So here, if we list the contents of this examples folder, we'll see that there's nothing in it, nothing was printed. So if we touch and then this file touch example.txt, we can see that that file now exists. Cat is also a helpful command to know. This will let you display a file's contents. So in this case, we have this text file called genes.txt. I have a little screenshot of it here. And you can basically see that same information is going to be displayed in your terminal. So helpful to just quickly check if a file that you're looking at has what you think it in it or has any content in it at all. We have the mkdir or make directory command. This is relatively self-explanatory. It's just going to be mkdir and then the name of the directory or the path to the new directory that you want to create. So here we're just making a new directory called new directory in our our home directory here, which you can see now reflected when we list its contents. We also have the rm command. This will let you delete files. So it's just rm and then the path to the file. So in this case, we're just deleting this file called badfile.txt. And we can see that this directory is empty once we remove that file. rmdir is going to let you delete an empty directory. So if we have this empty directory, rmdir is going to make it disappear. And we can see that when we list the contents. So just to note, you cannot delete a non-empty directory just with the rmdir command, and this is for a reason. Deleting things through terminal isn't going to work exactly like it would in Finder. So usually in Finder or a file explorer, you'll be moving items to the trash, and then you could recover or empty that trash later on. If you're deleting things in terminal, they are gone. You cannot recover them. So just a fair warning, don't go deleting things without a little forethought, but otherwise you should be fine. So you can actually delete a non-empty directory. You just need to use this -r flag, which stands for recursive. So recursively delete all the contents of this folder and the folder itself. And here's an example. So we're just deleting this non-empty directory. Find can also be a very helpful command if you are looking for a certain certain file. You maybe forgot where you put it. So this is just one example of the how to use the find command, and that would be searching in a directory by a file name. So for instance, we have this folder called find example. We can see that reflected in our command line here. And if we list the contents, we can see that we have another directory called another example and a file called findme.txt. So if we were to find and then the directory that we want to search in, which is find example, -name. So that's a flag. It's saying look for a file named, and then here's the name that we're looking for, findme.txt. And then it will print out the path to that file. Additionally, inside this another example folder, there's another file here, and I just am showing that you can also search for a file that is several levels deep in a directory. So here, even though we're searching the find example directory, it's going to look in this other directory here and look for findme2.txt and be able to print out that path for you as well. So like I said, this is not the only functionality of the find command. This is similar to all the commands that we've talked about today. So a good thing to know is how to look at the documentation for these commands and look at what other options you might have. And that's with this man command. So if you run man find, for instance, you'll see that we get the documentation for the find command, as well as the various options that you can use or flags that you can use with it. In general, I'd say getting used to reading documentation is one of the best things you can do as an introductory person in the computational sort of aspect of things. Documentation is incredibly helpful and will teach you honestly the best. You'll be able to find kind of the answer to any of your questions. So I'd highly recommend just checking out these man pages for the commands that we talk about today, especially. One also good thing to note is you can press Q to exit this menu because it can be a little confusing otherwise. And then the last command we'll talk about is grep, which is a global regular expression print. You can use this command to search for strings in a file. So for instance, if we have this text file here, which has some just example words in it. And we search for the string "and." It will print this line from the grep example file that says "an example," so it'll print that whole line. There's some other options that you can do with grep, and in fact, there's a whole lot of different functionality you can use with grep. Just a more simple example is you can search case insensitive. So that's with the -i flag. So you can see how these kind of flags keep reappearing and kind of change the functionality of these commands. So this is just another example using that -i flag. And then a few other things to note are you can search for regular expressions. So if you haven't heard of regular expressions or regex, it's a way of identifying patterns or certain kind of parts of strings or of text. So just a good thing to note. We won't get into it now, but it gives you sort of a more advanced way of searching for strings. And then you can also search recursively. We've seen this flag before with this -r through a directory for a certain string, and that's with this syntax here: grep -r your string, and then the directory to search. So again, you can check out the manual man grep to see kind of the additional flags that you might use with grep. And this is a command you might find yourself using quite a bit. So just to go back through them, we have print working directory, we have ls to list contents, cd change directory, mv to move a file or rename a file, touch to create a new file or change a timestamp on a file, cat to view file contents, mkdir to make a new directory, rm to remove a file, rmdir to remove a directory, find to find files and directories, man to display documentation, and grep to find text strings and files. So again, not a comprehensive list, but definitely enough to get you started.